प्लेन और सिंपल व्हाइट शर्ट को बना दे स्पेशल और फैशनेबल। फॉक्सेंट, न्यू फैशन वेयर फॉर मेन।
Good morning, you're watching DayBreak on Bloomberg Quint Live and I'm Alex Matthew. Here are a look at the headlines. First up, it's a quiet start to the day with regard to the markets on the last week, a day of the week rather, with the Nikkei trading marginally higher. Reliance Jio beats Cellular to become the country's third largest telecom operator in less than 6 quarters. Brokerage is looking to raise $75 to $80 million from existing investor, although at a lower valuation. India's drug pricing regulator finds 4 private hospitals in the NCR region guilty of charging exorbitant prices for medicines and diagnostic tests. Let's turn to the international markets now, and it was a mixed day of trade in the US markets, with 2 out of 3 benchmarks ending the day with gains, while the Nasdaq ended with marginal cuts. It was in fact down for the 4th straight session. Here's a report by Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle on all that's happened in the US market.
It was a mixed finish for stocks from Thursday's Wall Street session. The Dow and the S&P 500 finished higher, but the tech-heavy Nasdaq once again lower. The Nasdaq down 4 days in a row, the longest such losing streak since November of 2016. And relative to the gains for both the Dow and the S&P 500, well off the highs. At session highs, both indexes up more than 1% on the close. The Dow up about 0.7%. The S&P 500 up just about 0.1%. So we're continuing to see some of the intraday volatility that we saw on Tuesday session, Wednesday's session, a little bit bearish considering that the Nasdaq once again finished lower and the other 2 indexes well off the highs. Pressure to some degree by movement in rates. That's the big story. When rates move higher, it seems to be taking some of the steam out of stocks. Now, what is also taking some steam out of the financials on the day, 9 of the 11 S&P 500 sectors higher, but the financials, one of the 2 sectors lower, down about 0.7%, trading lower with rates lower overall on the day. So that's something to keep an eye on. That's a leadership sector. Could be a worry if any weakness there continues. As for individual movers, Snap traded lower, down 6% after Kylie Jenner, a social media influencer, said she barely opens the app. Roku also lower after the streaming company's guidance disappointed. The outlook was disappointing, but Avis, the car rental company, sharply higher, its best day since 2012 on a better than expected quarter and strong outlook. But overall, there was a bit of a risk-off tone with some of the volatility for stocks, plus bonds and the Haven yen higher on the day in Thursday's Wall Street session. From New York, Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News.
Well, it's been a positive start to trade in the Asian market despite the lack of a clear direction from the US market. The Nikkei in Japan is trading with steady gains of over 0.4%, and so is Hang Seng, by the way, and the Kospi in South Korea. I say most of the markets because the benchmarks in Shanghai have opened a couple of ticks lower. We'll have to see how that market pans out, though it's just open for trade. Let's turn to the Indian market, and Darshan Mehta and Agam Vakil are here to set us up for the day's trade and all this happened in the futures and options space. Darshan, morning. First to you. What's on your list today and how's it looking?
See, it looks decent because global cues are doing well, the commodities are doing well. The SGX Nifty has moved into the positive. It's up almost 16 points the last time I checked, so it's up almost 18 points, about the 10,400 mark in trade. So cues currently are on the decent side, but still there's time to go for our markets to open. Most of the ADRs ended with a positive bias. IT continues to hog the limelight given the fact that rupee is weakening against the dollar. On the lower end, you had Dr. Reddy's and Tata Motor, which fell in trade. Now, how did the commodities pan out in trade, especially crude? Crude was up almost 2% in trade yesterday overnight. Currently, it's trading flat in morning trade. But if you're looking at Brent crude, it's about the $66 barrel per mark. but crude nevertheless did well. Now, if you're looking at what happened as far as the LME was concerned, most of them ended with a negative bias except for copper, which was up 0.6%. But aluminium took the brunt. It was down almost 0.7%. Others were trading negative with a negative bias, but not so much of a correction that's coming in. Now, there is traction currently in the Shanghai markets. If you're looking at it, copper is trading up almost 2% in Shanghai. Zinc is trading up almost close to 1%, and aluminium is trading up almost 0.7%. Even when I check, rubber was trading up. So commodities in China are playing catch up at this point of time. As far as precious metals are concerned, flat closing, flat trades. Gold and silver are trading flat in trade. So that's what's happening as far as commodities are concerned. As far as the fund flows are concerned, FIs continue to sell heavily. They sold in 2,300 crores in the cash market. DIs bought in 1,000 crores in the cash market. So nevertheless, FIs in this month have sold in 7,300 crores. DIs have bought in almost 1,200 crores. But yesterday the numbers will be heavy because it was expiry day. So as far as the other sectors are concerned, the Nifty Bank continued to be flat. There was selling that was happening on the mid caps and small cap indices. So they were down anywhere close to 0.5%. One of the sectors that did the Wix was down almost 7%, given the fact that markets were seeing a little bit of traction. IT and pharma, the two beneficiaries of a weakening rupee, both of them saw traction, and on the Nifty Pharma, it was Aurobindo Pharma and Sun Pharma, which was seeing a lot of traction. On the other hand, oil stocks fell in trade. The Nifty Energy Index was down almost 1%. Let's see how the Nifty panned out. It was down 14 points. Maruti continues to bleed. Reliance was down in trade. ONGC was down in trade. But IT and pharma and a couple of private banks were the one that led the rally in trade yesterday. But Agam, what are you spotting?
Well, benchmarks continue to consolidate within a very tight range, so nothing much to speak for. That said, when it comes to the March futures, well, we can expect an increase in open interest considering we are moving into that series. It's the same for the Nifty Bank too. Despite the fact that we've seen very little traction in the underlying, we have seen about near 80% increase in OI again on account of the first day of the series. Moving in, we did see a fall of nearly 7%, and the Wix went down to around below the mark of 15. And the put-call ratio, however, surprisingly didn't change too much, despite the fact that we saw a lot of contracts expire. So that currently stands at around 1.18. In terms of the way things have changed in the options, where we've seen unwinding in the 10,400 put and a little more writing in the 10,400 call, which means consolidation largely. And this is also because of the fact that we didn't see too much movements. And Biocon, of course, sees fresh longs building in, considering the stock went up by as much as 7%. And Kotak Mahindra Bank also looking at fresh longs. And we also have several other IT companies which are the beneficiaries of the weakening rupee, moved up. Mindtree also up 2% and seeing fresh longs as well. So plenty of stocks in the broader markets have gained in advance. And it remains to be seen whether or not we do continue to see consolidation in the benchmarks too.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Agam. Let's move on now and focus on the commodity market. We've spoken briefly about crude. Jayesh Khilnani joins in with all the updates. I'm guessing you'll start with crude, Jayesh.
Prices are trading flat after a 2% jump overnight. Now, the surge in prices was largely attributed to the surprise inventory data that came in overnight. So the inventory actually declined as much as 1.6 million barrels for last week, which is the most in 5 weeks as per the report generated by EIA. Now, why this is important is because the Bloomberg survey anticipated that there would be an inventory gain of nearly 3 million barrels, while we got a decline of 1.6 million barrels. So that's the positive coming in for oil prices. As far as base metals are concerned, most of the base metals closed lower on the London Metal Exchange, except for copper. Now, the traders, they are split as far as copper prices are concerned, because the Chinese market has reopened. So price outlook is actually vague. Global aluminium production has hit its highest level in over 7 months now. So aluminium declined the most on the London Metal Exchange. However, if you look at the Shanghai Futures Exchange, we are seeing that most of these base metals are actually surging in the Shanghai Futures Exchange. So, for example, copper is up about 1.5%. That's the best performer over there. Zinc and aluminium are trading more than 0.5% higher, while steel is the only one which is trading lower, and it has extended its decline to the second day now. As far as gold prices are concerned, we saw that some stability has come about near the 1330 mark. Over here also traders are split on the price outlook. So there was a survey which Bloomberg conducted in which there have been 4 analysts that were bullish, bearish was 5 and neutral was 4. So, absolutely equal in terms of where the prices could go.
Thanks so much for that, Jayesh. Now, in less than 6 quarters after it started operations, Reliance Jio becomes the 3rd largest telecom player by revenue market share in India. The latest data that's released by the TRAI shows that the new entrant overtook Idea Cellular, but Airtel and Vodafone continue to hold the top 2 spots. Samit Sarkar is standing by with a breakup of the data that I just spoke about to tell us who has lost the most to Jio's aggressive customer acquisition. Samit, morning.
Good morning, Alex. So, TRI came out with this adjusted gross revenue data yesterday evening, which helps us to calculate the revenue market share. So, what is adjusted gross revenue? It is gross revenue adjusted for interconnect usage charges and other deductions. Now, according to this data, Reliance Jio in close to 16 months of its operation is now the 3rd largest telecom operator in India and is just around 90 basis points away from becoming the 2nd largest telecom operator in India. Now, this is the revenue market share that is there for the 3rd quarter of financial year 2018. Airtel's revenue market share stands at around 27.96%, Vodafone India close to 20.65%, Reliance Jio at 19.74, which is like 600 basis points more compared to what the company reported in the last quarter. Idea Cellular close to 17.3, Tata Teleservices at 4.4, BSNL, which is the state-owned company, at around 3.35, while other players' revenue market share remain at close to 6.6%. Now, surprisingly, this quarter, other than Reliance Jio, other 2 players, that is Vodafone India and Idea Cellular, also saw an increase in their revenue market share. Now, though it is a very marginal increase, you can see Vodafone India's revenue market share increased by 20.5% to 20.65%, while that of Idea Cellular from 17.26 to 17.33%. Now, though this is a marginal increase, but it is better than the 80 basis point fall in revenue market share that Bharti Airtel saw. Now, Bharti Airtel's revenue market share fell from 28.77% in the last quarter to 27.96% in the 3rd quarter of financial year 2018. Now, if we see the full sector, that is the full telecom sector. Now, the telecom sector yet again, the previous chart, if you can load it, that will clearly show, the next chart, I guess, the telecom sector revenue chart. Yeah. So this chart again shows that the whole sector's revenue has again fallen to by 11% in the 3rd quarter of financial year 2018 compared to the last quarter. Now, last quarter it saw an increase of around 4%, and this is again it has saw a decline of close to 11%. Now, this is the highest decline that the sector has seen in the last 3 quarters, and now the sector revenue stands at around 27,391 crore rupees. Now, if you see company wise, it is Airtel which has seen the most fall. Airtel's adjusted gross revenue declined by around 13% to close to 8,847 crore rupees, while that of Vodafone India and Idea Cellular declined by 10% and 11%, while that of Reliance Jio has increased by 27%. I guess these numbers are wrong. This is according to the 2nd quarter of financial year 2018, but the percentages are right. Bharti Airtel's gross revenue has fallen by 13%, while that of Vodafone India and Idea Cellular by 10% and 11%, and that of Reliance Jio by 27% in the 3rd quarter of financial year 2018.
All right, thanks so much for that, Samit. I'm sure we'll stay with that story and analyze it in a lot of detail over the course of the day, so do stay tuned. Let's move on to the next sector that we're looking at, and that's the pharmaceutical sector. The National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority tore into private hospitals in Delhi NCR for unethical profiteering from various activities. In a report, the NPPA slammed private hospitals for making exorbitantly high margins on drugs and consumables. Krishanu Mukherjee sums up the takeaways in this report.
The NPPA came out with a report on private hospitals in Delhi, which was actually nothing short of tearing into those hospitals for unethically overcharging for drugs and other consumables all across Delhi and NCR. Now, this comes in the backdrop of complaints being filed by relatives of deceased patients who claimed rather that they were overcharged exorbitantly for several drugs and other consumables by the hospitals, and even after their relatives died in those hospitals, the bodies were not released for days at a stretch. Now, the NPPA in its report clearly showed that some of these hospitals, that the report is on, 4 hospitals in Delhi NCR were known to be having margins of as high as 2,100%, which is 22 times of the price at which they would have bought those drugs and consumables. This goes particularly for syringes and cannulae. These prices go up that high. Apart from that, NPPA also mentioned that these hospitals were charging higher rates for diagnostic services as well in their hospitals compared to other private diagnostic centers in the city. Apart from diagnostics, also what hospitals were overcharging for and actually making more margins and more profits out of was in-house pharmacies that most of the hospitals maintain these days, which NPPA said charge way higher rates compared to other pharmacies across the city. Now, NPPA mentioned all these points and said they were monitoring the situation, but when it goes to the powers of the NPPA, they do not have any powers actually to take any action against these hospitals.
Well, on to the stocks in news. Those are the stocks that are likely to be buzzing in trade with regard to the news that has been released about them. And Shraddha Babla has an entire list to tell you about. Over to you, Shraddha.
Thank you and morning, Alex. I want to start off by talking about some of the earnings which came after market hours. So a good set of numbers coming in from some of the pharma MNC companies. Sanofi India is the first one, where revenues grew by 11%, net profit rose by 43%. Operationally also, the profit was up 23%, and the EBITDA margin saw an addition of another 200 basis points. When it comes to Merck, revenues grew by 22%, net profit grew by 42%. As far as EBITDA is concerned, they grew by a strong 30%, and there was a marginal bump up in the EBITDA margins as well. But it was a mixed performance as far as KSP Pumps is concerned, where revenues grew by a strong 31%, but EBITDA grew at a slower 12%, while net profit came in about 17% higher. That apart, we are also tracking Federal Bank. Now, the bank's board has approved acquiring a strategic minority stake of 26% in Equirus Capital. Now, this is for an undisclosed amount, but broadly, analysts believe that this is a positive step and is in line with the bank's strategy to increase its share of non-interest income or its fee income. We're also tracking Dilip Bilcon, which is one EPC project of 157 crores in Karnataka. Adani Transmission has received a letter of intent for one interstate transmission project in Rajasthan, and with this project, Adani Transmission will be strengthening its significant presence in Rajasthan. Now, GE Shipping or Great Eastern Shipping, they have completed the sale of one of their vessels, and you also have an ET report lastly, which has said that Axis Bank has asked its CIO Amit Sethi to resign. Now, this what makes it interesting is that this is on the back of a whistleblower complaint, and there have been some allegations of irregularities and inappropriate deals. So some negative developments as far as Axis Bank is concerned, Alex.
Thanks so much for that, Shraddha. Let's turn to Somit now, who's back with the big brokerage calls of the day. Somit?
And the big brokerage calls for the day, first we have is Deutsche Bank on Siemens. Now they have maintained their sell rating on the stock with a target price of 1,030. Now the company sold its mobility business to the parent company, and according to the brokerage, the mobility business has been separated just before a potential uptick. Now the segment was showing good growth prospect given the fact that railway and metro capital expenditure is picking up in India. Now the brokerage sees that the current valuations of Siemens are very expensive and looks steep, and they're expecting the company's net profit to grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 26% over FY17 to FY20. Second, we have is Goldman Sachs on Avenue Supermars. Now the brokerage has maintained its buy rating on the stock but have raised the target price to 1,672 from 1,611. Now the brokerage is expecting the company to open around 24, 28 and 30 stores respectively in financial year 2019, 2020 and 2021 versus 18 stores opened by the company each year earlier. Now on the back of this, on the back of more new stores, the brokerage has also lowered its same store sales growth estimates to around 11.6% from 12.3% over FY19 to 21. Also, higher number of stores could lead to some cannibalization, which could lower the SSG for the company. Third, we have is Jefferies on Federal Bank. Now they have maintained their buy rating on the stock with a target price of 145. Now the bank has acquired 26% stake in Equirus Capital, and according to the brokerage, this acquisition augurs well with the bank's strategy of building up corporate and institutional banking teams. Now the bank is significantly capitalized and can easily pay for this acquisition. According according to the brokerage, and the primary synergies will lie in broadening product offerings to corporate and SME sector. Lastly, the brokerage sees that steady loan growth, leverage optimization, improving loan mix and improvement in operating efficiency should result in gradual increase in overall profitability for the bank.
Thanks, Somit. On to another story that we have for you. Online grocery startup Grofers is in talks to raise $75 to $80 million, according to sources. This comes a month after rival e-grocer Big Basket raised nearly $300 million from the Alibaba Group. Nishant Sharma tells us all about Grofers' latest round of funding in this report.
Well, online grocery startup Grofers is in final stages to raise close to $75 to $80 million in a fresh round of funding led by one of its existing investors, the SoftBank Group, and according to two people familiar with the development. Now, one of the people told me that this round will value Grofers at a valuation of close to $310 million, which is close to 10 to 11% lower than its previous valuation when it raised $120 million way back in 2015, and at that time it was valued at $350 million. Now, existing investors such as Tiger Global Management and Yuri Milner's personal investment vehicle, Apollo, will also participate in this round of funding. However, Sequoia will skip this investment round. Now, people aware of the deal also told me that SoftBank Group is looking to infuse close to $60 to $65 million alone in this investment round. Now, the proposed deal is set to give much needed ammunition to Grofers, which is locked in intensive battle with its biggest rival, Big Basket, which just weeks ago raised close to $300 million in a round led by the Alibaba Group.
Now, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has told Bloomberg that wages in the U.S. will rise without any inflation concerns. He essentially brushed aside concerns about inflation rising too fast. Kathleen Hayes of Bloomberg News brings us this report.
The question everyone wants to know, Heidi, because right now there's so many questions about inflation and how does it work. But certainly one of the Federal Reserve's concerns, one of the bond market's concerns in the U.S. and around the world is that as labor markets get very tight, as taxes are cut and growth increases, that this will not only boost growth but boost inflation as well, for better or for worse. Here's what Steve Mnuchin told reporters just in the last hour or so. He says there's a lot of ways to have the economy grow. You can have wage inflation and not necessarily have wage concerns in general. And this is at a time when one of the things that spurred bonds to sell off in the last couple of weeks, stocks to sell off, even though they've certainly come back, is the fact that one important measure of wage inflation in the U.S. took a big jump recently. Now, Steve Mnuchin has also just rejected any suggestion that anything the White House is doing could have a downside, sidestepping the idea that tax cuts and increased federal spending amount to an economic stimulus, and that even with big bond increased sales by the Treasury, that this could be an issue for the economy, for the markets. He says, is it very good for the economy all this occurred? He says, absolutely. One of the reasons why the president won the election is because most middle-class Americans had very little wage growth. Also, he says, U.S. no longer fully dependent on foreign oil, so maybe the price won't go up as much, and that won't be another thing that won't feed into inflation. But very interesting, because this seems to be the message we're hearing more and more from Trump's team.
Well, the Aadhaar hearing continued at the Supreme Court yesterday. Senior Advocate Gopal Subramaniam concluded his arguments on behalf of the petitioners. Arpan Chaturvedi has the gist of all the court action in this report.
Well, Senior Advocate Gopal Subramaniam was again arguing today on behalf of the petitioners, and he has concluded his argument. Today's focus mostly was on the Aadhaar Act and the various aspects where he argued as to why that is illegal, as it leads to exclusion. And one of the main points he argued on was the fact of exclusion, and he said that it's a very important thing that has to be kept in mind. And of course, he said that there have been deaths which have resulted due to lack of Aadhaar and services being denied. And of course, he asked the court that the court should order that in every such case where such deaths have happened, there must be exemplary compensation. The central government must be asked to pay that. Apart from that, of course, there was also a brief discussions again on the state resident data hubs, which earlier, of course, these were state-controlled repositories which had held the biometric details. And Senior Advocate Rakesh Dwivedi, who's from the other side, got up and said that this was a project of an earlier government, and all the biometric data that was there with the SRDH has been completely destroyed. And after that, of course, now the hearing will continue on March 6th, because there will be a week-long break for the holy holidays in the Supreme Court. And after that, of course, Senior Advocate Arvind Attar will continue his arguments on behalf of the petitioners.
Well, the PNB fraud case continues to dominate conversation, and there's updates in the telecom industry to talk about. So clearly, lots to talk about over the course of the day, and you'll find the live market action right here on Bloomberg Quint Live. But there are several stories on the website that you should consider reading. That's bloombergquint.com. First up, the Singh brothers, Malvinder and Shivinder, accused of financial irregularities at both companies promoted by them, that's Fortis Healthcare and Reliance Enterprises, have said that they need to resolve complex issues facing their family and businesses. The founders sought time from stakeholders to present facts that will allow, according to them, balanced views. Now, the fraud at Punjab National Bank appears to have broken a steady run for the rupee, inducing some volatility into the Indian currency markets. However, the sharp drop in the forward premium for the dollar-rupee pair is what is drawing the attention of the currency market. The sudden drop is pointing to a sudden rise in dollar demand, according to Anant Narayan, who is a professor at SP Jain Institute of Management. And according to a PTI story, the government has prepared 4 separate options for the proposed stake sale in Air India. This includes retaining 49%, 26%, 24%, or selling its entire stake. Well, that's all we have for you on this edition of Daybreak, but as I said, there's a lot more ahead. All you need to know comes up next. Do stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Quint.